I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange. Hey there, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, the paranormal pop culture show. As always, I am your host, Aaron Sagers. And today's guest is someone I'm honored to call a friend, as well as a colleague, and a rather prolific author at this point. He's written numerous books, and more than 30, I believe, and has travels the country researching as well as doing paranormal events. And we've become friends along the way. Of course, his name is Richard Estep, and he has been a paranormal investigator for 30 years, researching claims of ghosts and hauntings on both sides of the Atlantic. And you've even seen him on the TV shows, Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal Revenge, Paranormal 911, and has made guest appearances on A Haunting, Destination Fear, and Haunted Case Files. But today, we are talking about his new book, In Search of Demons, Historic Cases of First-Hand Experiences from Experts and Skeptics Alike. It is published by Llewellyn Books. It is available now, and in the book, Richard hunts down first-hand experiences and historic accounts, it's right there in the title, of the most legendary demonic activity. He consults with experts ranging from a medical doctor to an ordained Catholic exorcist on cases like the Salem Witch Trials, and even the inspiration for The Exorcist. So, let's bring him in. Richard Estep. Richard, thanks for joining me today.
My friend, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me onto the show.
Yeah, I know we've been talking about it for a while. We still have some other topics we need to make happen with some interviews with you, but you're just so darn busy. I mean, we're all busy, but you're busy writing a book, probably writing a book right now as we speak, in this interview.
I am actually. So let me just finish this sentence.
Yeah.
And moving on.
So the book, in Search of Demons, have it right here. Before we get into the meat of this, I'm curious, what was sort of your first awareness of a demon growing up in England, being fascinated by this stuff, but what was a demon to you as a young kid? What was it?
That's a great question. And to me, the answer is Hollywood, which is more your wheelhouse. Growing up as a kid in the UK, demons were not real to me, they were things you saw in scary movies. I became a paranormal investigator in the 90s, which I was in my 20s then, worked cases in the UK, never had a quote unquote demonic case. Came to the States in 1999, continued to investigate hauntings, and really didn't encounter too many either. I mean, everyone was aware of the work, of course, of Ed and Lorraine Warren, John Zaffis, and people like that. But it was really the explosion of reality television. I would date that to around about 2008, 2009, shows like Paranormal State and, of course, then Ghost Adventures, which really put demons in the forefront. And suddenly they were everywhere.
Right. And even though we had experienced sort of the satanic panic, which origins of which go back, centuries, but we had experienced sort of the 20th century wave of the satanic panic in the late 60s and in the 70s. That's not exactly something that carried over in a way to the UK. So while people might be freaking out about perhaps being possessed in the wake of The Exorcist in the States, not really something that rippled across the UK for you.
No, or Dungeons and Dragons was the other thing, no matter how many TV movies got made with people like Tom Hanks talking about the negative effects of role-playing games, that seemed to largely pass us by in the UK. Demons weren't something you found in the everyday world. You found them on the silver screen.
Mm-hmm. So when you're an investigator and then you move over to the United States and have lived here for how long now at this point?
25 years, can you believe? I got off the plane and the first thing I did in this country was go to a movie theater and see The Phantom Menace.
Oh, okay. And so a different kind of, I guess, demonic possession, perhaps the dark side. I mean, actually, when you look at it, Darth Maul is, I mean, the imagery is very classic devil, demonic, and he is the Phantom Menace, you know?
Looking at Darth Maul, it's always struck me that when I watch Insidious,
Hmm.
they're just so close. Those two creatures, they are so close in design, and it works in both ways too. It works for each of those two movie franchises, I think.
Yeah. And then that imagery becomes part of our visual reference. So then when you're talking to eyewitnesses and
Mm-hmm.
they're referring to certain things that might look evil, how perhaps as a result of consuming that media, they're describing things that look very much like what they saw in those theaters.
Life truly does imitate art in this field, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I guess life imitates art, and then I guess life also influences art. So it's
Indeed.
just a constant cycle. But when you're move over to the United States and you are when you're a paranormal investigator, even before the wave of modern paranormal TV that we really started to see emerge
Mm-hmm.
in 2004. What was your take on this notion of demons beyond just the paranormal, the supernatural, the
Mm.
biblical, dare I say, for you?
Well, I mean, one thing that struck me about it is that I would investigate help cases, and I would see that if I would glance at somebody's bookshelves and DVD collection, um, those cases where the people in question claimed or believed sincerely, and they were sincere, that they were dealing with, a demonic attachment, it was wrecking their lives. There were people that I counseled and helped that were having absolute nervous breakdowns. But I would look at their shelves and they would have every Exorcist sequel, Rosemary's Baby, things like that. So demons were part of their belief system, part of their culture, part of their frame of reference. And I'll never forget the first case I worked, the first help case here in the US was a house outside of Denver where it was a poor couple who was their first home that they owned together. And they'd been told by a visiting investigative team that they had a demonic infestation. They were told this after about a 30-minute visit, no less. And they were having creaking floorboards, the classic signs kind of a haunting. And this poor couple, they had drawn crosses on every door frame and above every window. They were sleeping in turns. So the husband and wife would take turns napping while the other stayed awake to watch in their bedroom. Their dream became a nightmare. The American dream became a nightmare for them. And we were able to prove that the reason the floorboards creaked and the house was the way it was because it was on the final approach to Denver International Airport and also close to a very busy road. And vibrations were causing those creakings. It was pretty explicable. But they were so entrenched in their belief system. They were very Catholic, which I completely respect. And demons were part of their world. And they had just been terrified to be told that they had become the target of one. It was so sad. They fled the house and never returned, sold it.
Yeah. It's something that I noticed similarly with working with clients, more private consult kind of things, going
Mm.
into homes. And it was really around, for me, I would say probably like 2005, 2006 is when I started going in homes. And obviously, people have posters, they have books, they have
Mm-hmm.
DVDs, but almost the need to have a demon with their phenomena seemed to
Mm.
happen a lot, or at least the thing that they were leaping to very quickly. It went
Yeah.
from we might be haunted to we might have a demon. Is that something that you have experienced?
It is, and I think unfortunately now in popular culture, we've reached kind of a race to the bottom where so many, um, and I'm not really throwing shade here. This is an observation, but so many content creators seem to find demons everywhere, and certain TV shows do that also. And I think it's necessary for them to survive in the ratings. That genie can never be put back in the bottle. However, one of the reasons I sought your counsel out for this book, and you do have a chapter dedicated to our conversation. You play devil's advocate well, which is quite ironic, considering the subject matter. And I talked with you about this kind of influx of demonic claims since the rise of paranormal reality television, and you had said, "Well, devil's advocate though, what if in fact all this extra attention is drawing in additional demonic activity? Maybe it actually is a case of this activity is ramping up, it's on the rise. We both have a mutual friend, John Zappis, of course, who's renowned for his work in demonology. And I spoke with him this past weekend, and he was asked, John, do you think demonic cases are on the rise? And he said, no, I don't think that they are, but I think that awareness is at an all-time high. Demons have never been more forefront in our minds than they are in the 21st century.
Yeah. I want to get back to that a little bit more about the content creators, but let's cover some other ground. As you said, 25 years in the US and
Mm-hmm.
paranormal investigator for more than 30 years. So then not to put pressure on you, but why did it take 25 years to write this book? What was the origins of the book and the catalyst to actually starting to write it?
Well, writers, I mean, and you're a writer yourself, so you know this. We often write not only what a publisher will pay us to write, but we write what we ourselves would like to read. So many authors have done that over the years. And I looked at the literature on demons, and there seemed to be broadly two types of book. There was the one that came from the faith-based worldview that demons are real, we should be scared of them, but the church is here to save and protect us. And that didn't really question their origins at all. Then at the other pole, you had the very uber skeptical notion of demons are they're ghosts and goblins, they're made up, and if you believe in this, you're a simpleton, which insults half the world's beliefs. And I didn't find either of those satisfying approaches. I was looking for the middle path that would look at the phenomenon as a rounded phenomenon. I mean, the main reason you were a choice for me to talk about for this book, not that I don't respect your ability as a paranormal investigator, but I don't link Aaron Sagers and demons, as a subject like I do with John Zappis. But you could talk very intelligently about the pop cultural phenomenon that really began with The Exorcist, and kind of has exploded and continued to this day. I wanted to talk to psychologists, psychiatrists. I wanted to talk to exorcists. I talked to a world-class illusionist, Aidan Sinclair, to ask, could you fake convincingly a possession in order to fool eyewitnesses? I wanted to talk to people in the mental health field, the physical health field, secular and faith-based individuals. I wanted to do a complete 360 on the phenomenon as best I could. And that took time.
Yeah, and you do. You speak to a lot of people that we would consider friends and colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
and Aidan Sinclair, illusionist. You talk to Jason Hawes from Ghost Hunters, Joseph Laycock, who I have enormous respect for, and Michel Belanger, people that I would say actually could call themselves a demonologist should they decide to do so, but they don't really. How has this project differed from your approach, at least from your other paranormal work?
I think that it contains elements of my traditional writing style, which is I enjoy the you are there approach. I like putting myself in a car, in my truck, and hitting the road. The great American road trip is a passion of mine. And I went to several of these allegedly demonically infested locations. So that is not new. What is new, though, is the attempt to cover so many different angles and aspects. I covered the Zozo phenomenon. If ever there was a 21st century demon, one that is spread almost entirely digitally, I think, we're looking at Zozo, and it's very controversial. So I tried to cover multiple aspects of this phenomenon that I really have not seen written about extensively before.
The paranormal world community.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously quite diverse. It's not a monolith, but
Mm-hmm.
it can be tricky when you're talking about this subject matter, especially if you're approaching it from sort of the middle ground element,
Mm-hmm.
not a believer and not not entirely dismissive either. So were you concerned about backlash in taking on what is a very popular subgenre
Mm-hmm.
within paranormal entertainment, but also something that speaks to people's very strong beliefs a lot of times? Any concern about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was bracing for hate mail, which has not come in significant numbers yet. I think the deal is that there are many people who are not just emotionally invested in this, but financially invested. The emotional investment side of things, when demons are such a part of your belief system, when you truly believe that they are out there and that they are a threat to you and that they are a hazard, that does provoke strong emotions, and understandably so. And my objective, if I've done my job well with this book, is I won't convince you, if you do not believe in demons, that they are real. And conversely, I won't convince you that they are not real if you, are already taking the opposite view there. I wanted to just lay out the evidence and let people decide. I'll tell you what I think, but I'll never tell the reader what to think.
Hmm.
Which, I imagine the reader was more kind of a jury, but I was arguing both sides, the case for the defense and the case for the prosecution. And yeah, some people will take offense. And again, there are those that make their living telling people about demons and charging for their services and things like that. Those are not people I sought out as interviewees for the book. There are those people that just they they are terrified of them, and I think with good reason. If you truly believe in the existence of demons, it's very rational to be afraid of them. But one thing that fascinated me, and I'll just bring this up, is that I looked at the possibility of death and noticed that more people die of exorcism every year in the world, particularly throughout the third world and other cultures than our own, than are ever claimed to have been harmed by demons. Exorcism can be a useful and a very dangerous thing.
Did you give any consideration to it was a 2024 Real Clear Politics poll, I believe, that found something like 70% of American adults, Real Clear Opinion Research poll it was,
Mm-hmm.
believe in the existence of the devil,
Mm-hmm.
not lowercase devil, but the devil, which would
Mm-hmm.
then suggest, that there is also this strong belief in and demons.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also see, not only is a satanic panic not gone away, it's evolved, and now it involves politicians talking about the presence of demons
Mm-hmm.
amongst other politicians, typically the ones
Mm-hmm.
they're running against. Did you consider put any thought into that as you're working on this book? And do you think that the timing of this book actually, even though you've been thinking about this for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
is somewhat supernaturally serendipitous?
I didn't. The poll in question. So the book manuscript was actually finished New Year's Day of this year. So nothing that happened in 2024 could really influence the manuscript. But I did note, and this was pointed out to me by our mutual friend Jeff Belanger, that demons have always served a purpose throughout society, and they've always made excellent scapegoats. We've seen the devil made me do it defense fail spectacularly. But during the Puritan years, when there was no United States, there were just these small colonies. They were used as a handy scapegoat for inappropriate, lustful feelings towards others. It was a bad thing if you were a colonist and the whole colony required unity to survive, to have those kind of inappropriate feelings. There's a reason there's that commandment: "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," right, or husband. So how terrible would you feel if you did? But then, hey, that was in fact an incubus or a succubus. That wasn't me. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person who's been targeted by a demon. And so they've served this role, this useful role. And as you say, politics is just the latest iteration of it. We as human beings have often weaponized demons, the concept of demons, to serve our own very material ends.
What were talk about some of the interviews you conducted? Because as I mentioned, you've spoken to so many notable people in their fields throughout this book.
Mm.
Any of which that you found to be especially surprising interviews? And I think unconsciously we all, even if we're trying to approach something with a very as objective as possible approach viewpoint, we still in the back of our mind have certain expectations of what to get out of an interview. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe what were some examples of people you spoke to that you thought it was going to go one way and then you were surprised to see it go another?
I think two of the bigger ones were Michel Belanger and Bishop Brian Ouellette. Michel is the author of the Dictionary of Demons and very graciously wrote the foreword to this book. And I really did not want to disappoint Michel with this book. So someone who literally wrote the book on classical demons. And I wanted to know what Michel's kind of take on them was. And both she and Brian Ouellette, who is a bishop of the Old Catholic Church, has performed exorcisms. I was very much expecting fire and brimstone and that kind of thing from him. Both of them seemed very, I hate to use the word progressive, but non traditional. They talked about demons more. Hey, we're talking to the spooky nerds on this show, right? They talked about the dark side of the force as being kind of a good analog, that we aren't necessarily dealing with literal creatures, with pitchforks and horns and cloven hooves, that we may be dealing with a negatively influential force, the flip side of good, the flip side of the light in creation. And we've chosen to label this as demons, these chaos agents, if you will. And again, we all have specific expectations of what demons might look like. Thank you very much, Hollywood. Thank you, TV. We're familiar with that image. But what if they aren't actually a personification as such? Any more than you would personify a cancer cell. And that just fascinated me. This idea of demons and evil being a malign force, a malign influence, a malign intelligence, if you will, but a necessary one that you can't live without. Because how do you have a universe of light without a universe of darkness as its flip side?
When we discuss ghosts, it seems like even though there might be people that approach it with a certain spirituality or religious connection to it, you can also talk about ghost as entirely separate from spirituality, energy, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. The with demons, ghosts can also be can prompt us to think about our own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this. Do you, in your research, have you found that demons might serve some sort of value to make us think about like our own moral compass in a way of like, are we are we good or are we bad? And are the my actions alone what defines my goodness or my badness? Is there maybe something deeper involved that is somewhat intangible or supernatural? I mean, and I know you dip into this a little bit, but kind of take it from there. Did you find that there might be a value of demons in that way?
In terms of demons making us consider our own moral values and choices,
Sure.
I've always railed against the idea that we need demons as a threat, as the stick, where, perhaps heaven is the carrot and hell is the stick. I do know that there are individuals that kind of believe in that way and try to live their life that way. And I respect their right to do that. Um, but I do think we're far more likely to use them as scapegoats than anything else. The devil made me do it defense, to bring that back up again. The idea that, yes, I did this terrible thing, but I was not in fact culpable. I was not at fault. There's also the idea that I was fascinated and wanted to ask not just our friend Joe Laycock, but psychiatrists as well, psychologists. Why is it that atheists don't seem to get possessed? There almost needs to be this pre-existing belief in the demonic in order to accept the possibility of possession. So, to be told the best defense against demonic possession is not to believe in it was a very powerful thing, because that spoke to the nature of belief. And that's something that, in the paranormal community, we all think about a lot. We talk about a lot. We know that belief can have form. In the medical field, the placebo effect is not debatable. It's not arguable. It's a very real and proven thing. I've often wondered if prayer is not a spiritual form of the placebo effect. And I don't say that in a disrespectful way. It is kind of directed belief. It's intended to shape belief. But if you flip that around, you look at demons and then curses. Aaron, you and I talked briefly about cursed films, especially in light of the so-called Exorcist movie curse. If you believe in a curse sufficiently, a demonic curse, I think it was Billy Graham that came out and said, the devil is in every frame of that film, and
Yeah.
millions believed him, right? Well, that has its own kind of power too, doesn't it?
It's curious though, because if there's the placebo effect of prayer and of curses, if you believe you're
Mm-hmm.
cursed, you ultimately are. The power of prayer is something that people talk about. People,
Yes.
gather around in prayer or meditation. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
dismissing that either. I actually
Mm-hmm.
think it is a very powerful thing. And the power of believing you're cursed is a very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really see the same analog to demons and angels. If people talk about demons fairly readily
Mm-hmm.
as these things that actually exist, have some sort of form, and they're out there and they're acting upon society and individuals and whatnot. You
Hmm.
don't really hear as much about actual angels moving around, and we certainly don't see it as represented in popular media and pop culture. So, any thoughts as to why? Is it just that demons are sexy and angels are, haven't had their sexy moment yet, or what is it?
Well, look at the ratings on Lucifer, and then look at the box office on movies like City of Angels. I think it is that we have made demons sexy, right? I mean, Tom Ellis, the personification of the devil. The devil is not supposed to be nice. And the devil is not supposed to be somebody that you want to spend time with, but we, and I mean in terms of pop culture, have made the devil and demons kind of cool and kind of sexy, and hip. I would argue, you're the expert, I would argue a lot of this began with the Devil's Advocate, the movie with Pacino and Keanu Reeves, I think. But we've kind of gone down that road now. But the devil and demons have always been tempters. If you look at some of the ancient woodcuts, you see demons tempting, primarily females. It's interesting, but then the incubi and the succubi. So that has always fascinated me as well. But demons are good for box office. And here's the other thing too that has me thinking, Aaron. Everybody has a deep inherent desire to be special. The vast majority of us are ordinary human beings. I always like to joke that if you look up the word ordinary or the word beige in the dictionary, you'll find a picture of me reading a history book. Um, I think we're all ordinary people. But then there is this kind of deep human desire to stand out and to be special. And if you are targeted by a demon for oppression or for possession, if you garner the attentions of the devil himself, someone that is supposed to be concerned with global events, with how am I doing sparking a war in the Middle East? How many souls am I harvesting this week? Oh, by the way, how are things going in Aaron's kitchen in Brooklyn? I sent one of my minor demons to infest his apartment. How special must I be if I garner that kind of attention?
Yeah. And I mean, you do see some of that similarity with the people that may be having visions of the Virgin Mary,
Mm-hmm.
visitations. But again, it seems like those folks are typically more often written off as like, I got a little bit of a kook, whereas people
Mm-hmm.
are, seems like they get a little bit more attention when they're talking about the demon side of thing. But yeah, and evil and taboo and temptation, yeah, that's always sexy,
Mm-hmm.
it's so yeah. I don't know about the exact or like when the switch flipped, because you even look at like stories like Faustus,
Mm-hmm.
and evil is alluring. But I remember as a kid seeing "Oh God, You Devil" with George Burns, the
Oh
sequel to
yeah,
"Oh God," and look, you got George Burns playing Satan himself, and that's likable and it's charming. So he was
mm-hmm.
there even then, and that was early '80s, I believe. So in the wake
Fair
of
point.
the Satanic Panic, so
Mm.
the do you do you find yourself, is there anybody out there that you've researched that you talk to Michelle Belanger, who points
Mm-hmm.
out that the notion of demons could be very beneficial. You could be
Mm-hmm.
dealing with a Pazuzu that if you're on the right side of Pazuzu, it's working out well for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a god of fertility and crops and everything. But
Yeah.
you piss it off or don't pay the right tribute. Well, you might be on
Mm.
the bad side. I equate it
Yeah.
to living in a neighborhood in New York that might still have some mafia control happening. It can work for you or it can work against you. There's no one really, is there anyone really out there operating with that duality of the demons still, both protectors and aggressors?
It's interesting. You should think about that. You should bring that up. I mean, um, I got to thinking about this whole element of things, and I think Good Omens. The novel by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, which of course became a very popular Amazon TV series, really apes John le Carre's kind of Smiley's People, George Smiley spy stories. Which, if you've never read them, I don't know if you have. But for any of your viewers that haven't, the idea is that you have spies who are from the Western and Eastern blocks who realize they have more in common with one another than they do with their respective masters and ideologies in Moscow, Washington, and London. And so I kind of have always enjoyed this image of the demons and angels to a certain degree, trying to kind of do their Joe jobs as the rest of us do. They're just down here trying to get by. Hey, I got to influence people one way or the other. That's my job. And maybe we meet up on a park bench, or maybe we meet up for a beer or a glass of wine at the end of the week. I
Mhm.
don't think that's actually completely untenable a concept, and it's something that's been done in fiction. No one would seriously consider that in reality, but maybe we kind of need to. Maybe they are just there are those individuals that manage to stay on the good side for a period, but then you always kind of have to pay the piper, or at least so the stories have us believe. The idea of, yes, the devil is a tempter, but the price will come due. And whatever it is that you sell your soul for. And by the way, speaking with Patty Negri for this book, she talked about a film project she was involved with in which someone tried to literally sell their soul to the devil. I had not realized that was something they'd attempted to do. Um, the bill always comes due, right? No matter how well you might think you're doing, you are always going to get bitten eventually if you dabble with demons.
When do you think the entertainment portion of this becomes problematic? Because so much of this and what you write within this book, even though it's something that paranormal audiences and readers can pick up and appreciate and learn a lot from, we are also
Yeah,
talking about something that is so driven by entertainment media.
yeah.
So when does the entertainment media become problematic, in your opinion?
I think the big elephant in the room, and we don't have time to do the subject justice, but when there is an impact on mental health, and we see people whose mental health is adversely affected because of situations where, demons are either involved or are believed to be involved, when there should clearly be a form of clinical assistance. And to its credit, before authorizing an exorcism, the Catholic Church now mandates a psychological evaluation by a qualified clinical professional before approving it. So that is a good thing. But I think that's important. It also concerns me that you might invite people into your home, into your space, into your circle that perhaps should not be there. Individuals that, how can I put it, may have paid $99 for a certificate in a demonology course, and purchased a black robe or cassock on Amazon. And now, hey, I'm a demonologist and I'm here to solve all of your problems. Do you really know who you are bringing in, and their capabilities and qualifications? I
Yeah.
talked with Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, who is a legitimate PhD parapsychologist. He teaches, by the way, an excellent online course in demonology, and I encourage anyone to take it. Dr. O'Keefe said, I wanted to take an online course myself before I was putting my own together. So he paid, I think, the princely sum of $99 or something like that, was told to read the book The Demonologist by Gerald Brittle, which is essentially the biography of Ed and Lorraine Warren, was then given a multiple choice question test. And when he passed said test, was declared a demonologist and has a certificate framed to prove it.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
that's why I reference Michel Belanger and Joseph Laycock as people that are academics that have done extensive research on this topic and the history of this topic.
yeah.
They don't present themselves as demonologists, but they're some of the few people that I actually would say, oh, they could if they wanted to.
Yeah, they could. And the other thing about both of those individuals, I'm sure they will not mind me saying, is that neither of them, and actually this applies to every interviewee in the book, but neither of them would accept any money for sharing their expertise and perspective. They just wanted to help educate all of us on the subject. So wherever money is changing hands in regard to demons, I become a little bit suspicious because, of course, there is the potential for gain and the blurring of lines that perhaps should not be blurred.
you mentioned we were talking about the when entertainment becomes problematic, and you approach it from the perspective of going into the homes and creating the content.
Mm.
And the client investigator model of a lot of paranormal entertainment. But when do you think it becomes problematic for someone putting it out there for the viewers? Do you think there's any responsibility from a production company or a TV show or a content creator about what they're putting out there? Because uh, all entertainment, everything we're consuming, isn't there a little bit of a buyer beware scenario anyhow? Is there an extra
There,
level of responsibility for the people creating paranormal content involving potential demons?
I think there is. I mean, the first time I actually ever asked myself this question was after a BBC show aired called Ghost Watch, which I'm sure you and many of your spooky nerds are familiar with. It was, if you aren't familiar with it, my apologies, I'll just briefly recap. But this was a show that was essentially like the Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio broadcast, which you could very easily mistake this drama, this fictionalized show, for being a real paranormal investigation, which ended in a demonic possession at the end of a seance. And I bring that up because there was a tragic case in which a young man with special needs, I believe, took his own life in the aftermath of having watched that show. And the show was kind of banned from British TV and not repeated for decades. I don't know if it has been repeated. You can get it on DVD, but it raised the question of, this was labeled a drama, but it was interpreted by many people who missed the opening disclaimer as being factual. And that was a real world consequence. Somebody died because of consuming this content. So bringing that forward to today, what risks do we have by representing? You see so many YouTube videos, they have thumbnails like this. My night barely surviving the demonic portal to hell. And many of these are houses I've been in and slept very soundly and had no bad experiences in at all. Not saying that they don't have paranormal activity, but I think it's far better for us to ask, how do we know we're not dealing with an aggressive human-based haunting or, a more aggressive standard haunting? Why are we labeling them demonic? But the fear that you can invoke is very, very real. And people can obsess over this. It can ruin lives. It can send people down some very dark pathways into dark places. Psychologically, it can be very damaging. And I think as a content creator, we have the obligation to share both sides of the story. Unfortunately, demon is a tag word. It's a keyword on social media, which just look at the trends, look at the top trending videos. They are not the kind of hauntings I used to investigate in the 90s in Britain, where it would be a stately home with a friendly old lady that died there in the 1800s and glides through the library. Those aren't sexy. Those don't garner views. And so I think there is this race to the bottom with demons and content creators where I need to make it darker. I need to make it scarier. I need to make it more horrific. I want you to get your fix of fear, and then I will get your likes and follows. And I think that's unethical.
I want to push you a little bit more on this because I'm wondering about the ethics of it. And it's also something that I think about and struggle with a bit because my desire is not to create like demon focused content. But I also recognize that, hey, look, that gets clicks. People watch that and it sells tickets at the box office still. It was only 10 years ago that the Conjuring movie came out, made bonkers money. And we're still seeing Insidious movies that do pretty well, and the demon topic still does well. Pop culture, both scripted and unscripted. I wonder, like, when is that unethical then? Like, if you're selling a story on YouTube, anyone can watch it. That is true, and there might be people that are emotionally unwell, maybe a little bit more vulnerable than others, more susceptible to these things. But how do you not dip into the rock and roll is evil and video games are influencing the vulnerable and the unstable? And you see where I'm going with this? Like,
yeah, I
why
do.
should there be more responsibility or more ethics exhibited by a 20-year-old YouTuber that wants to talk about going into a hellhole as opposed to video game producers that might be blamed for mass shootings?
Uh-huh. I do, and having experience with both of those things,
Right.
I would say that it comes down to how you're representing yourself. If you go see a Conjuring movie, they are based on the cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and of course they have to say that. I know that those movies are heavily fictionalized. If you look at what was written about them, there are those that say the actual cases themselves were heavily fictionalized, but you have to look at how they're represented, I like to think. And I'll give you an example of how I deal with this. One of the television shows that I consulted on asked me, hey, was there a case you can think of in which the spirit of a murderer was tormented? Sorry, a living flesh and blood murderer, was tormented by the spirit of one of their victims. They were looking to do a scary segment that, kind of related to that. And I said, well, the one that springs to mind most obviously is a location you know very well, Aaron. It's Al Capone, who, when he was in Eastern State Pen, which I know you've done extensive work there, and Alcatraz, famously was talking to people that weren't there, was hearing voices, things of that nature. And the story is out there that these were the spirits of the victims that he had killed, this Valentine's Day massacre and all that, which the producer who was working on this loved it. And then my degree is in paramedicine. I'm a paramedic by profession. So then ethically, I said, so that's one potential. There's a paranormal angle. Now let me tell you what syphilis does to the human brain. Because Capone had a mental age somewhere between 8 and 12 when he was finally released. He was believed to be absolutely no threat. He was at times drooling and incoherent, and he was having conversations, speaking to himself. It's far more likely that rather than dealing with ghosts, the syphilis that Capone contracted as a young man, 18, I believe it was, and that had slowly caused neurodegenerative symptoms throughout his life, finally reached the point where, here we are. And I think what you do in those cases is you lay it out for the reader, for the viewer, for the audience to decide. You don't condescend to them. You don't pander to them. Here are two possible explanations. One's paranormal, one's not. You pick the one that resonates with you, because ultimately it's your decision. And that's what I've tried to do with this demons book. Here's the evidence. Here are some alternative viewpoints. Demons may be real. Demons may not. You can decide that before you turn out the light tonight, as opposed to telling people this is real and it's coming to get you.
Yeah. Throughout the course of the research, writing this book, or even just previously on your other cases, were you haunted, uh, you know, lowercase haunted by the possibility of the existence of demons? I mean, there's the no atheists in foxholes expression, which has gotten me in trouble in the past by some atheist organizations, actually. But is there the potential for you getting haunted by the possibility of demons when you're on the case and you're like, oof, am I maybe poking the bear here?
I was open to that because as a paranormal investigator, I had in the past used to, it's fair to say, very arrogantly look down my nose at people who did psychic protection, quote unquote. Then I brought something negative home with me after a trip and had to call a friend and eat humble pie because he's a Catholic priest. I'm an agnostic. He had to come in and bless my house, which worked. And I said to him, Stephen, I don't believe in God in the way that you do. I'm spiritual, but I don't know how I would define it. And he said, don't worry, Richard, long as he believes in you, which I thought was great. Whatever he did over the course of the 90 minutes, he came through my house, he blessed it, he anointed the entrances and exits. It stopped the activity. So whether it was a genuine, objective, procedure that worked, or whether it was, again, placebo, that my wife and I took a dose of, all I can tell you is it worked. So ever since then, I've tried to be far less arrogant as I approach things in which I don't necessarily believe. And when it came to demons, as an agnostic, I went to Erling, Iowa, to investigate the infamous 1920s exorcism there. They have rosaries in the church as gifts that you can take. And I made a donation because I do believe in not just taking stuff for free, even when it's offered like that. And I did take a rosary because there was a part of my brain that's going, hedge your bets, Richard, just in case, you might be on the trail of some pretty dark stuff here. But the culmination to my book was that I was driving home from a location which said to be demonically infested. It's a place in Kansas, so small town America. Two friends who are both psychic mediums contacted me independently and warned me that something associated with this house, something non-human, they described it as being tall with long fingers, so a human build, but an elongated human with strangely long fingers, was glommed onto me, did not want me leaving and telling its story. And what do you do in that point, in that case? So I said, thank you very much. I was very polite, very respectful. Maybe half an hour out of that location, heading west back to Colorado, interstate speeds, my brand new truck tire, one of them shredded. destroyed completely, apropos of nothing. I'm at the side of the road, very shaken up. Fortunately, not seriously hurt, but I could have been killed. I could have easily gone into oncoming traffic when I lost control of the vehicle. And all I could think about after taking that truck into the shop, and the mechanics looked at the tire and said, "This is a catastrophic failure. It would have to be a very rare manufacturing defect in this brand new tire for it to behave like that. Does it happen? Sure. I couldn't tell you the last time I saw one," is what this very experienced mechanic told me. So again, in the back of my mind, there is just that little voice that's saying, did you peer into the abyss long enough that it's now peering back into you?
Was there any moment of, and again, this goes back to people kind of thinking more in terms of demons than like angels, but was there any
Yeah.
moment of like, oh, maybe I peered in the abyss and it's peering back at me, but also maybe there was something else looking out for me and preventing this from being a larger situation? Because these things can easily go hand in hand.
They sure can. I mean, and maybe you can argue, if things had gone just a little bit differently, that I could have been killed in that accident. And what it reminded me of was when I was writing about the Erling case, the Erling, Iowa possession, soon to be a movie starring Al Pacino. Um, there was a moment in that case in the literature where one of the exorcists who was taking point on that case was driving back to Erling after having done an errand, and said that he saw an amorphous black mass, a cloud of some kind, materialize directly in front of his face, blinded him. He couldn't see. He went off the road into a ravine, wasn't seriously hurt again, but could have been killed, walked back to Erling, because now we're looking at the 1920s. No other motorists passed him. And word of his accident had gotten back to the church ahead of him. How? Because the ergumen, the lady who was possessed, had told the other exorcist about the car crash. So the parallel between what happened, and I'd been to Erling myself as well. So the parallel between what had happened to Father Joseph Steiger back in 1928 and what happened to me in 2023 did send a shiver down my spine. Same case, very similar circumstance.
There's the expression that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then meanwhile, we have a lot of people saying they're encountering demons and the devil left and right, which seems like it's kind of oppositional to the biblical devil's mission, if that was the
Doesn't
case.
it?
But there is sort of the flip side of that expression is that, you know, I don't want to say the greatest PR maneuver that God ever rolled out was convincing the world the devil did exist. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
the devil is good for business when you're in the spiritual warfare gig, right?
Indeed, the devil has always been good for business, and yeah, the idea that I can buy the potential that spiritual warfare is a thing. I have a harder time believing that the champion that's going to save you is Jeff, the plumber from Arkansas, that's taken a couple of online classes, and that's no respect to people from Arkansas or people named Jeff Belanger, if you're listening. I'm making the point that, until fairly recently, it's been believed that you had to be a member of the Catholic Church that was deeply entrenched in the law, that you had to have studied, that you had to have apprenticed, in order to perform exorcisms, in order to go toe to toe with the devil's minions or the ultimate boss battle, the devil himself. Well, now we have people that are living everyday lives and very minimal education and are claiming they can do the same thing and are happy to take your money for it.
What do you think? What do you think the result is of the internet saturation of the pursuit of devils, and not even the pursuit, but the acknowledgement when you look at any paranormal, TikTok or YouTube, that it just exists. It's not really a question. It's out there. What do you think the result is of that saturation?
I think we are spreading the belief, or this is spreading the belief, the unquestioning belief that demons are every bit as part of our natural world as birds, dogs, cats, or any kind of animal. One of the reasons I wrote this book was I wanted to question what evidence is there. We as a species have believed in demons since time immemorial. The dawn of human history, they've always been with us. So as a concept, I don't find them unbelievable at all. I find the notion, though, that they are suddenly everywhere and are tormenting people in very ordinary houses, and that they've become such a commercial sideline. I find that a little harder to swallow. So I think that the danger is if you do accept that demons are really a thing, if possession is real, if this is a real danger, then we do a disservice to the individuals that suffer demonic attacks and possessions with so many false positives. The background noise that has been generated means that if there is a genuine case, it may get completely missed or it may get dismissed because it doesn't sound like the new normal that is being put out there.
Yeah. And I think you know me enough to know that I do. Yeah, I think about like sort of the both sides of things. Like
Mm.
what if this, but also what if this, you know?
Right.
And I do think about, okay, if there's actually something legitimate out there, then the saturation is just uh just not distilling it, but kind of it makes it easier to dismiss, I suppose. Then there's like the other side of it is like from a perspective of spiritual warfare, if that is
Mm-hmm.
actually existing, it could be strategically beneficial for the devil or demons
Mm-hmm.
to create this oversaturation to the point that perhaps we are inured to the existence of demons and then just stop paying attention to them at all so they can move about, willy-nilly. That is obviously not something that I believe, but is that something that you encountered in your research that maybe there is a benefit from the side of evil to just, kind of shotgun blast us with all of this to the point that we stop paying attention?
I mean, I think that that's happening already in terms of the natural world. We're so sick of hearing about genuine issues such as global warming, and safety and gun crime and gun control and things of that nature. We've all gotten, fake news and fraud and all those kind of things. We've politicized disinformation so much. It would be remarkable if that didn't happen in the spiritual realm as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well,
The politicization, if you will, of scripture.
and I know that you speak about Jinn and you
Mm-hmm.
speak and I know that you have served in the military and I know you've
Mm-hmm.
interacted with a lot of people from different belief systems and everything. And a lot of times when we're talking about this notion of demons, we are doing very Judeo-centric Western world
Yes.
approach to this. So what were some of the things that within the scope of the
Mm-hmm.
book that made you that it had you thinking about sort of the bigger perspective of the demon? I know you talk about sort of dictionary of demons and
Mm-hmm.
sort of the Babylonian origins of it and the Egyptian and Greek origins of it,
Mm-hmm.
but just through your actual research and interviews, anything that really made you
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the other perspectives of what a demon might be.
My great regret with this book, and it was not really one that I could fix, but kind of I feel the book's biggest weakness is that it is, as you said, it's so heavily westernized and Judeo-Christianized, which speaks entirely to my travel budget. As a writer that I got a six-figure advance for this book, and there was a decimal point in there. So this was a book that pretty much cost me money to write in terms of what I'll make back from it. But I wanted to tell this story, if you will, as passionately as possible. So I really wish, with all my heart, I'd gotten the chance to talk about the supernatural in Africa, as our mutual friend MJ Dixon is doing in her books. I wish I'd gotten the opportunity to look at India and some of those other cultures in which, they also have the same stories of demons. They may be labeled somewhat differently. The trappings may look different, but this concept of a non-human negative force, which may be able to take you over or heavily influence you, has always been a thing as well. One thing that I found very disheartening was the concept of the backstreet exorcism. Britain is a good example where there are certain cultures in Britain I'm not making any comments about immigration here, but when certain other nations, people from those places immigrate to a Western culture like Britain and the US, those beliefs come with them. And there has been an influx of death by exorcism in Britain, where these poor individuals have been kept under the most horrific circumstances, purely because of the belief that they're possessed. And I think the case we're all aware of is that of Annalise Michel, the woman that was essentially starved to death over the course of her own exorcism, who died of a combination of malnutrition, metabolic imbalances, and other issues. That still happens today in 2024. It's happening in towns in the US, in Canada, in Britain, in Europe, and it's happening behind closed doors. Um, so it is something that I wish I'd been able to shine more of a light upon.
Ultimately, how did this book, if it did, alter your own perceptions, beliefs, your personal takeaway?
My personal takeaway was that it was surprising that I would meet certain people that I interviewed for the book, and you mentioned Aidan Sinclair, the illusionist, who I fully expected to be so skeptical that they would dismiss the concept of demons out of hand. Aidan took time. He's a former, as he will tell you, self-described reformed con man, and his job as an illusionist now is to con you with your permission. That's what an illusionist does. We consent to being fooled by them. So Aidan was, I wanted to know with his skill, and this is a man that's been on America's Got Talent, Penn and Teller, those kind of things. With that level skill, could you fool observers into thinking that a possession was genuine when it wasn't? Making someone levitate, those kind of things. The trappings we've seen in Friedkin's movie, making a head rotate and vomit and all that kind of stuff. And he told me that you get within about 6 feet of his setup, and then you would tell that he was having to use various apparatus to do it. So, not really. And then this very skeptical man, this highly trained observer, told me about the time the Catholic Church asked him to attend an exorcism one night in Wyoming as an expert witness to help determine the veracity or not of this possession case. And of course, this is a man who didn't believe in demons. When I first met him at the Stanley Hotel, where we both worked together, he didn't believe in ghosts either, and has since, shall we say, revised his views somewhat. He's less skeptical now. But he talked about the fact that sleight of hand is something that all illusionists excel at. He took a St. Michael, which of course is the religious token. St. Michael is the archangel that is invoked to protect from evil, and in spiritual warfare, he's kind of the heavy hitter on the side of good. So a St. Michael kind of medallion. And this lady who started out perfectly normal, when night fell, became the classic, prototypical thrashing, drooling, speaking in tongues, lashing out, possessed argument. When she leaned forward, Aidan slipped the St. Michael into her pillowcase. She put her head back and then jerked forward as though she had been burned. And he said, I just don't get it. There's no way she could have known. She couldn't have seen. She couldn't really have felt it. It's a fairly thin sliver of metal. But every time she touched that, she acted as though stung or burned. And he couldn't explain it. And so I said, come on, Aidan, put your money where your mouth is, my friend. Did you witness a genuine possession? And he thought about it for a moment and he said, something not of the ordinary was taking place in that house. I don't know what I would call it, but I cannot explain it. So when I have hardcore skeptics that would tell me, something that they just couldn't explain, something is going on, Aaron. And what we want to call it, what we want to label it is up for debate. But there is more to this phenomenon, that it cannot be dismissed simply as fancifulness, religious belief, mental illness, or any of those kind of things. There is a phenomenon at work that defies easy explanation in many cases of possession.
We've discussed a little bit about some of these things. There's a lot of strange experiences that we've individually had, and
Yeah.
a lot of the people that I like speaking with, that I consider trusted colleagues, are folks that don't approach this with
Mm-hmm.
a rule book and say, a ghost is XYZ and this is X, not definitive
Mm-hmm.
rules applied to what is undefined. But that said, I've had weird experiences that, as you allude to in the book, I think it was MJ you were
Mm-hmm.
speaking with, that said, I do feel strongly like maybe what I encountered was not, it was sort of in an other category outside of
Yes.
what we traditionally think of as a ghost. And I've had situations like that. And you're describing Aiden talking about this experience where he's like, this was something
Mm-hmm.
happening, something that was like sort of in the other category.
Yeah.
So you have MJ. I'm telling you, I've experienced this. Aiden's mentioning this. So I'm going to ask you, Richard Estep, have you had an experience where you felt like it tiptoed into that other category where you felt like you were not dealing with what we would traditionally call a ghost and some other people might call a demon?
I think I hesitate using that word demon. Before I answer that question directly, let me preface it with this. Um, a wise person once told me when I had severe back pain, they said, if you go see a chiropractor, they're going to recommend an adjustment. If you go see a surgeon, they're going to recommend surgery. If you go see a pharmacist, they're going to recommend medication. In other words, when you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. So
Hmm.
when demons are part of your worldview, it is very easy to leap to everything in that other category that you just labeled so well, I think, and put that into the demonic box, right? So I've had cases of hauntings that were dark, such as the Monroe House in Hartford City, where Michelle Belanger worked with me on that case. There was certainly a very aggressive entity at work in that house, which Michelle was able to draw out. And she got the strong sense that it was not human. And many people have experienced this at the Monroe House. They do refer to it as the demon house, in fact. So that was a case in which I felt that that label might possibly apply. But then I also asked myself, what proof do I have that this wasn't just a very belligerent human haunting? And where can we draw that line? So I hesitate to use the word demon. Um, One thing that does make me wonder is that there are well documented cases of animal hauntings. Every paranormal investigator has heard those heartwarming stories of the phantom dog or cat that jumps up onto the bed at night long after it's physically passed, to comfort its owner. I think so many of us have those stories or have encountered them. If you can have animal ghosts, then by definition, non-human hauntings are real. So where do we draw that line? Lions, tigers, bears, Our good friend John Tenney likes to talk about the cobwebby sensation that you often get at a haunted location. And then he will, with a distinct twinkle in his eye, point out that, hey, maybe even spiders have ghosts.
Hmm.
Right? A comment that makes everybody's skin crawl when he makes it, but it's a valid one. So, non human hauntings, demons, are we talking about the same thing or are we talking about something different?
It's a fair question. Although I would also say there's a distinction between, the people that report a lot of animal hauntings versus things that are they perceive to be inhuman versus the things that are perceived to be demons versus,
Yes, agreed.
or,
Aggression. We're
yeah,
talking about aggression.
yeah,
Demonic hauntings, those that suffer them or believe they do, a demonic haunting wrecks your life in
yeah.
so many ways. Dave Schrader has said, you don't think you have a demonic haunting, you are in no doubt. That's like thinking you were hit by a truck, which is an interesting analogy, and I think it bears some merit. So obviously, I'm not implying that it's a similar haunting when Fluffy the cat comes back to comfort its owner. But the case I'm making is that if we posit that non-human hauntings are a thing, that animals of any description have souls or can manifest paranormally, why would we not then think that other types of non-human um, hauntings might exist? Is there the equivalent of an apex predator in the paranormal realm, something that has never walked this earth as a human, either as a human being or as an animal? Could there be something entirely other? You know, I'm sure that you've talked about on this podcast before aliens and UFOs and extraterrestrials. John Keel's ultra terrestrials are much on my mind right now because I'm working on a Mothman project. What is the crossover there? Hauntings and those kind of ultra terrestrial experiences have their commonalities, don't they?
Oh, and I definitely that's kind of where I veer towards is that I think that if you're going to be of a certain religious mindset where
Mm-hmm.
the presence of demons is very real, then you might lean in that direction if you're experiencing weird things. But it all depends on, how you approach something. I just tend to think that there's the other category. I don't know exactly what it
Mm-hmm.
encompasses, but I think it's quite interesting and fascinating. Uh,
That's the closest thing to wisdom I've actually heard in the paranormal field. The people, and the reason I call you a friend and a respected peer is that I like the people who say, I don't know. And I think that throughout history, demons have been that black box for us. Your horse went lame. That's too bad. It was probably a demon. Your child died in childbirth. Your child was stillborn, probably cursed by a demon. It helped human beings make sense of a universe that sometimes defied logical, rational explanation. And I do point out in the book, Aaron, that probably the most frightening concept is not that the devil is real, to me at least. It's not that the devil may be real and has these minions, these demons that are out there targeting good people. It's that we might actually be all alone in a rudderless universe, that nobody is at the helm, that bad things happen to good people through random chance and happenstance. Because you can't defend against that. Demons, you can get blessings, you can go to church, you have a defense. Demons can be defended against. Chaos, random chance, bad stuff happening cannot. And that frightens me far more.
Yeah, order.
Mhm.
Chaos versus order. Even if
Yes.
there's a bad side to the order, there's rules that are broken,
Right.
there's ways to reinstitute those rules. What are you going to do about this situation as opposed to
Precisely.
the chaos? The two final questions for you. The first is you talked a little bit about you would like to have included more research on other theologies and
Mhm.
cultures, and it's such a big topic that it's just so impossible to do. But aside from that, as a writer and a researcher, you close out this book, you submit the final manuscript
Mhm.
in the year since, because you said you wrapped it on January 2024, January 1st.
Mhm.
What would be the extra chapter, the additional research, another case, another cultural phenomena that you would include now, October 2024, since you submitted that final manuscript?
I wish that I'd gotten greater insight from the Catholic Church, which, we hear repeatedly that the request, the demand for exorcisms has never been higher, that it has been steadily rising year after year. I wish that I'd been able to get boots on the ground with the training program that the church has for its new exorcists. There are documentaries out there that give some insight. Friedkin's The Devil and Father Amorth is an example that springs to mind. But I wish that I had been able to do that and actually accompany one of their exorcists from the very beginning to the resolution of a case and follow its progression.
Is that something that if, someone gets their hands on In Search of Demons, Catholic Church reaches out to you and they
In a
want you to
heartbeat.
invite you?
In a heartbeat, I would love to do that because I feel that, yes, of course, all organizations have their secrets, and privacy is, the equivalent of HIPAA, of kind of confidential patient information should always be there in cases like this. But I would like to look at that in greater detail, and something that I still did not give adequate coverage to in the book because it would take a book in and of itself is the relationship between mental health and alleged demonic possession. How many people are misdiagnosed as being possessed while in actuality they needed mental health care? But then conversely, there are those individuals in the field that will tell you that if you are dealing with mental health issues, you become an easier mark, an easier target for oppression. And so I would like to explore that as well, respectfully, tastefully, and maintaining confidence where possible.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing about it, isn't it? That
Mm-hmm.
there's always sort of these loopholes and rationales to explain, yeah, but what if? Like
Mm-hmm.
is it that people are mentally unwell and they're getting the wrong kind of help? Or is it because they're mentally unwell, they are better targets, tastier targets, there's ways to justify that all around. It's maddening from my perspective looking at some of that. The final question I have for you is having done this research, what are some pieces of pop culture of entertainment involving demons that you are still entertained by and love and maybe even get a good thrill out of on the other end of writing this entire book?
The Exorcist is timeless for me. It is so well done. It has never lost its ability to shock or terrify. Now, my own biases come into play here because The Exorcist was banned in the UK until I believe 1997, 1998, something like that. It was a rite of passage for British kids of my generation in the 70s to spend, £2 or so to buy a grainy VHS rip of The Exorcist and actually watch it with your friends, you know. Not something that you had an issue with here in the States, but it was almost impossible to see The Exorcist growing up. I saw that movie when I was 11 or 12. It shocked me quite understandably, and it retains that power today, partly because it's so well told, partly because Friedkin is a master craftsman of the screen. But I think also what that movie does really well, the horrors of that movie at the beginning are all medical. You know, the clanking of the MRI machine of the scanner when Reagan is being assessed, imaged for a brain tumor. Freakin injects some body horror in there that makes you as afraid of the medical system as he does of the demon Pazuzu. So I think that The Exorcist is a masterclass in making this scary, even though it ends on an optimistic note. I do like to pretend that none of the sequels actually exist, I'm afraid, but The Exorcist remains supreme in the entertainment realm for me.
Outside of In Search of Demons, how can people support Richard Estep and check out your work and keep an eye out for maybe some other work that's on the way?
I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Instead of supporting me right now, why don't you, if you would be so inclined, drop a donation to the Red Cross and the work they're doing in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene? I would personally appreciate that a great deal. You can find my books in brick and mortar bookstores like Barnes and Noble here in the States, Waterstones in the UK. You can, of course, find my books also at the common online retailers. See me on Facebook, Richard Estep Author, Twitter, Estep R, or I have a website, richardestep.net. I love to hear from readers. Do please be kind.
All right. Well, my guest is Richard Estep. The book, which is available now, is In Search of Demons, Historic Cases and Firsthand Experiences from Experts and Skeptics Alike. This has been Talking Strange. I have been and shall remain so, Aaron Sagers. Till next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.